Hi everyone, this is Python Codes 404, and I'm back to give you some resume tips for your dream tech role. I got a couple of requests to go through some resumes. Unfortunately, I don't have the capacity to cater to one-on-one requests, but I figured I'd do some points or tips that could help you tune your resume for specific tech roles. So here we go. I'm gonna dive straight into it. The first one is obviously something we all know, which is to be concise. And I say this because even though all of us know it, a lot of times what happens is we like to post about details of some projects that we are proud of. Now, it's great to go into the details, but again, keep in mind that the recruiters have about 4 to 10 seconds to parse your resume. So you really want to make those seconds count and put in all your accomplishments that you're proud of, but make sure they're no longer than 3 bullet points, with each bullet point being about a sentence long. We don't want to write paragraphs, just points. And that's the second one, is to use bullet points on your resume and avoid having long paragraphs or avoid having bullet points that are greater than 1 or 2 sentences long. Now, going into the details of your work experience or projects itself, I would say when you describe your work experience, make sure you mention the specific work that you achieved under that experience or under that project, right? So, what I mean to say is avoid being vague. And I say that because sometimes we feel that the technology or the things that we do is too specific for some recruiters to understand. So, I remember thinking that if I add in too many details of my projects, one, it can violate the non-disclosure agreement, but it could also give out unnecessary details to the recruiter, which they might not be interested in. But then while going through some of the resumes, I found that when you say very vague things, it's hard to understand what you actually did during your work experience or your projects. So, for example, if you're working as a software engineer, you would say something like, I led an end to end system, designed the architecture, developed its front end and back end, and I would also quantify the impact you made during that role. So I would avoid saying something like, I made X things cheaper, but instead, you should be saying something like, I reduced the cost of X by 40%, or I made Y things efficient by 20%. And I would again be more specific. When you say efficient, you could say you reduce the latency, you increase the throughput, or you did something very specific to the service or the project that made it easier for the users to work on or to use the product in a much easier way. But then the 2 points being here is be specific with respect to your work and use numerics or quantify your impact. And that leads me to the fourth point. When you do mention your work experience or your projects, I would say restrict it to a one page or restrict your resume to one page. And this is debatable among a lot of people online, but I feel when you have 4 to 10 seconds to review a resume, it just gets harder to scan more than one page when you're looking for specific details related to the role. And so a one page resume makes sure that you make your most important qualifications shown to the recruiter. And also, when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's easier for them to just look at your resume and talk about some of your relevant projects. And so I would say stick to one page unless you have like more than 5 to 10 years of experience, in which case you would want to show all your relevant work experience. But especially if you're in university or if you're an early grad or anywhere with less than 5 years of experience, I would say stick to one page for your resume. And this has a format. Now, the format I typically use depends on whether you're in university or if you are more of an experienced graduate. And I'm going to discuss this in the next point, basically, with the resume format being divided into. So, for people who are in university or have less than a year's experience, I would recommend a format with your education at the top, followed by your work experience if you have any. I would say include all your internships or anywhere you've worked as a researcher, part-time jobs which are relevant to the role, and also include your projects. So I say projects because when you're in university or when you don't have a lot of work experience, the projects showcase your skills, especially your technical skills, and it also shows that you are proactive in working towards your technical skills. So basically, you've tried out different things, you've implemented or you've had hands on experience with some of these projects that you can use while you're doing your projects for this next role. So I would recommend putting in everything that you've worked on that is relevant or near relevant to the role. And this is going to be different for folks who have more than a year's experience. And why I say this is because when you have gained more experience, your experience itself becomes much more valuable than your education and projects. So, the format I would recommend is something like this. First, I would put your work ex at the top, and I want you to put in all your relevant work experience, the roles that you've worked at, the part time jobs that you've done, the research you've done while you were at your university, or any other work experience relevant to the role. And this should be at the top because when the recruiter looks at your resume, you want them to have a very clear picture of the relevant roles that you've worked at and also your number of years of experience. So, usually, roles have levels depending on your years of experience, and you want the recruiter to have a quick look at your resume and understand the years of experience you've had for them to map you to a relevant opening or a relevant role that the team is looking for. And apart from the work experience, what I've seen some people do is that they also add a headliner right above the work experience. But again, if you have more roles that you've worked at which you feel are relevant for the new opening, then I say skip this part. But if you feel that your headliner is better at conveying your experience and your impact from your previous roles and the work you're looking to do in your next role, then I would recommend putting the headliner at the top and then the work experience. All right, so that's the first two parts. The third one is, I would say, add your skills section. And this is the technical part of your resume where you want to add in all your technical skills, the languages you've used, the frameworks you've utilized in your previous roles, and so on. This is also relevant for folks who are in university or have less than a year's experience, but I would say keep it concise. So I don't want you to put every language that you know of or every skill that you want to implement, but rather make it relevant to the role. So let's say you're applying for a software engineer role. I would put in things like Java, JavaScript, HTML, CSS if you're looking for front end, React. And if you're looking for back end, you want to put in the skills relevant to that. And that would obviously be different if you're applying for roles like machine learning engineer. You would put something like Python, pandas, and so on, depending on if it's a data scientist role or a core machine learning engineer, right? So I want you to be careful with the skill section. Don't overdo it, but also make sure you put in all the skills that you've utilized in your previous experience that are relevant to the next role you're looking for, right? And the last thing is, I do want to include your education section as well, but what I recommend is put this at the very bottom. And another important thing is, I feel it's better to omit the exact years of your education for two reasons. So, the first one is when you omit the years, you can avoid falling into the trap of ageism. And I know this might not always be the case, but then again, if your education has been completed more than a year ago, after which you've had some work experience, having it at the bottom, just fulfills the checkbox of meeting the educational requirements, and the exact years are not as relevant. Also, you can always mention it when the recruiter asks you on the call if they do need it to move ahead with the process, right? So, what I like to do is I like to put it at the bottom without the exact years, and that has helped me move ahead with most of the processes. It has never been a problem for me. And that's pretty much it for the resume format. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the project section because I know some roles, some companies put more emphasis on that. But I also want to make sure I segregate that for new grad roles, the roles which cater to university students or people with less than a year's experience, versus more mature roles or experienced roles for people who are experienced in terms of having more than a year of work experience, right? So for the projects itself, I would say when you're in uni or when you have new grad roles, I would say put it down on your resume after the work experience section, as I mentioned above. But also make sure you don't put in like 15 of them, right? So make sure they're relevant to the role. Ah, and also make sure that these are the projects that you've recently worked on. So I would avoid putting a project that you worked on when you were in high school or when you were in mid school as compared to the ones that you completed in your university. So you want to make sure they're recent, they're relevant, and they utilize the skills that you're looking to work on in the next role, right? And for the other group of people who were more into the experience section of the roles, I would highly recommend putting all your projects on a portfolio and then adding a link of that portfolio on your resume. And why I say this is because sometimes for specific roles, the team does like to go through your GitHub profile or go through your live demos to make sure you're a good fit, right? So it's a good idea to keep them somewhere and then have a link to that place on your resume. Now, I say a portfolio because most people find it easier to put it at one place and then have a link to your portfolio, but you can also use things like GitHub, which is one of the most used platform, and make sure to add a README file for people to understand what you're doing under that repository on GitHub, right? And you can be creative with that. Just add all your projects somewhere that people can have access to and put it on your resume. All right, the next one is kind of an important one because it makes the lives of the recruiters a lot easier. And you do want to make sure that it's easier for them to understand your resume, for them to map you to an open role, right? So I would recommend adding your location, phone number, and your email on the top of your resume for the recruiter to know what location are you open to and for them to reach out directly to you to have an initial conversation about the role and to understand your work experience or skill set. And what you can do is, let's say this is your resume, here is your name. What I've done in the past is I've made separate sections for your email, phone, oops, and location for the recruiter to know exactly how to reach you and the place you're located as soon as they look at your resume. And this top corner makes sure that you have all the relevant and the important details in one place so that after they're done going through your resume, they know how to reach you pretty quick, right? And this is just helpful and it has no consequences. I know some people don't like to put in their phone numbers, but then I know a lot of recruiters prefer just calling people and having a quick chat as compared to sending an email and then waiting forever for people to reply. And it's no surprise, but it's often the case that people who get back faster are usually ahead in the recruiting process just because it's kind of a first come, first serve process, right? No recruiter is going to wait for a specific candidate and halt the entire process. So whoever responds faster has a better chance of going through the process earlier. But that's not to say that you will just go in irrespective of your experience or skill set. But it does help. It gives a slight edge over others. So, highly recommend. Put in this section. And for the next point, I feel this is kind of an important one, especially for roles that you feel you're most likely to make the best out of, or basically say it's your dream role, right? What I would recommend is tailor your resume for those roles. And why I say this is because a lot of roles have, or at least it seems to have, similar stuff, but in reality, they might have slight differences in the skills or the keywords or even the soft skills that they're looking at, right? So, for example, let's say you have two roles under software engineering. So, a company, or actually two companies, are looking for a software engineer, and one of them is looking for a full stack engineer, and the second one is also looking for a full stack engineer, right? And what they've mentioned in the skill section is somebody who's a team player, someone who's worked on front end and back end of services, and basically knows how to code in generic languages, or some of them might even be flexible with the languages, let's say Java, Python, and so on. And what they're looking for is folks with good skills in algorithms and data structures, right? Now, this is a pretty generic framework for all software engineering roles, but if you look closely, one of the roles might have something like experience related to ML projects or experience related to finance projects. And usually they're mentioned under great to have, or they could also be mentioned in the description of the team, not necessarily the skills section. So you gotta read through the whole thing, not just browse through, and you want to make sure your resume is tailored according to that. So, for example, if I am the candidate and I'm applying for those two roles, I want to make sure when I'm applying to the role that caters to projects related to finance, I make sure to put the work experience in financial sectors or the projects I've done which are related to the financial sector in my resume as compared to the other role, which is looking for a software engineer with some more experience or a little touch in machine learning projects. That is something very different from having worked in the financial sector, right? So I want to make sure that I remove the previous projects or the previous experience if I have a better relating skill set for the machine learning projects, right? And it's not to say that one role has a better chance of you going through than the other, unless you're interested in only one of them. But some of these projects cater to multiple sectors. So I would say have a look at your projects, have a look at your work experience, have a look at your skills section, and then tailor it according to the given role. And I wouldn't do this for every role because I know I've tried that and it's really time consuming. But I would highly recommend doing this for at least your dream roles or especially for roles that you think have specific needs as compared to the generic ones. And so that's to tailor your projects, that's to tailor your resume for your roles. And the last point that I have is I've seen a lot of people shy away from putting in their achievements just because they think it's not important. And this is especially true for new grad roles or for university students or people who have less than 1 year's worth of work experience. And what I always recommend is if you have any other key achievement that you're proud of, you should put them on your resume. And so that's going to be my last point is put your key achievements on your resume, irrespective of them being super relevant, but just because you're proud of them. And some examples that I give, which might not be applicable to everyone, but you might have something similar, right? So, for example, if you have any publications which isn't in the top tier journal, that's all right. Just put them on. If you received any scholarships in, let's say, your university or in any of the other courses or programs that you attended, I would say just put them on because that shows that you're great at what you do and it shows your effort you've put into your program and into the things that you're passionate about in general. The other thing is awards and medals. And I've seen this is a part where people hesitate a lot. So I'll give you a nice example of something I've put on my resume while I was in university. And so I was a national level soccer player, and I added that in my resume while I was in university because I didn't have a lot of work experience and I was applying for internship roles. And that actually helped me get like 3 internship offers. And it wasn't something which was for an extended period, but what it did was the experience or the awards that I received in soccer kind of highlighted my team spirit, my collaborative skills, and it conveyed that I'm a team player, right? And you can always have these skills, or it's good to have these skills in your corporate role as well. So some of these skills are transferable, and teams and recruiters like to see them on your resume. So don't be shy. If you're proud of an achievement, put them on, but also highlight the transferable skill that you can transfer from that experience to your next role in the industry. And that's going to be pretty helpful, especially for new grad roles. And that concludes all the key points that I wanted to give for your resume. If you have any other questions, please feel free to put that in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to get back to them. But just to summarize, these are the 9 points I highly recommend you think of when you draft your next resume, right? So the first one is to be concise. Each recruiter has about 4 to 10 seconds to look at your resume. The second is to use bullet points. It's just easier to read as we just go through your resume instead of paragraphs, and you can just try that for yourself. The third one is to mention specific work and avoid being vague. You want to let the team and the recruiter know exactly what you worked on and not look like you've just copy pasted from another general resume, right? So be specific and quantify your impact. People love to see numbers, so put them on. The fourth one is I recommend having a single page for your resume unless you have more than 5 to 10 years of experience, which is relevant to the role. The fifth one is resume format, where if you're in uni and looking for new grad roles, put in your education first with your expected year of passing, then your relevant work experience, and then your projects. You can also add in a skills section if you feel that's relevant to the role and it helps segregate your skills or highlights your skills apart from the work experience. And then for people who have more than 1 year of work experience, you can put in a headliner at the top, which is optional. It doesn't always help, but if you feel confident about it, go for it. And then after that, the first thing anybody should be looking at is your work experience, and your years of experience should be very visible when someone has a look at your resume. So they want to see what role are you more suitable for, right? So you want to make sure your years of experience is very visible when you put your work ex at the top. Then comes the skill section, and the last part can be education, just to make sure that you meet the requirements or the basic requirements for their education qualifications for the role. The sixth point is about the projects, and for people who are looking for new grad roles, I would say it's important because it's something that the recruiters do look at to see how proactive you are in your own domain of interest and how you've applied some of these skills, because they're not expecting a lot of work experience from you. If you do have them, it's great, but if not, just add your projects anyway. For people who are looking at experience roles, I would say add all your projects on a portfolio or GitHub, but make sure it's easy to look at. Nobody wants to go through each line of code you've written to understand the projects you've done. The seventh one is to put your details or contact details and your location details to make sure the recruiter can easily map you to a role in a specific location and can also easily reach you if they do like your work experience or they do like your skill set. The eighth one is to tailor your resume for your top roles. Well, technically, you can do it for every role, but I just find it very tedious and it just takes a lot of time to cater it or to tailor it for each of the individual roles. So I just do it for the roles that I'm very excited about and just put in the same resume in the ones which I feel are a 50-50. The ninth one is to not be shy of putting your key achievements on your resume. And this is especially true for new grads. And I know the shyness or the weirdness, the feeling of weirdness that you come across when you just think of your random achievements and you're thinking whether you should put it or not. I would say if you do have that space on your resume, it is better to put them and show them as transferable skills, especially for early new grad roles. It does help in the selection process. But even if you're an experienced candidate and you have some great publications that may not be directly mappable to your previous role or your next role, I would say put in your publications and scholarships, because it sets you apart from a lot of these candidates that have similar work experience. So I would highly recommend you do it as well. And those are some of my top tips that I've applied in my own resume that has helped me clear a lot of the initial screening rounds, after which comes your technical assessments, on which I've made a separate video. So all the best. If you have any more questions, please do let me know, and I'm more than happy to help you. Until next time, see you. Bye.